Built in about 3675 BC and remaining in use until the construction of Aveburyhenge over 1,000 years later, Windmill Hill is the largest of all known causeway enclosure sites in Britain. The construction of the site's 3 circular ditches seems to have happened over a great many years. Excavations at the site have uncovered flint tools and fragments of early pottery, together with human and animal bones, including the intact skeleton of a young child. There is also evidence that a large number of cattle and sheep were killed or eaten on the site, and it is possible that Windmill Hill might then have been a place where festivals were held, or as a market where animals were slaughtered and artefacts traded. A rectangular enclosure to the east of Windmill Hill, and contemporary with the circular ditches, has been interpreted as a mortuary enclosure. This was where human corpses were left to be picked clean of flesh, prior to the skull and principal bones being ritually interned in a chambered tomb. From the end of the 3rd millennia BC, Windmill Hill seems to have been largely abandoned from its original purpose. However, it is possible that a folk memory of the site's former importance lived on, since the summit of the site later became the focus of a Bronze Age cemetery in the form of the round barrows that can be seen today. At just over 100 metres in length and 3 metres high, West Kennett Long Barrow is one of the largest and most impressive Neolithic graves in Britain. Built around the same time as Windmill Hill and lying 4 kilometres to the south, the barrow was used for at least 1,000 years. West Kennett Long Barrow contained both cremations and the partial remains of at least 46 individuals. And alongside the interned were grave goods, including pottery, beads and stone implements, dated to between 3000 and 2600 BC. Accessed at the eastern end of the barrow via the forecourt, in which the rituals and ceremonies to the dead were conducted, the mound then opens up into 5 chambers along a central 13-metre long passage. How long barrows were used did vary between communities, but a common theme is that the chambers within did all contain the remains of men, women and children, with no departmentalisation based on the age of the deceased at their time of death. Unlike later Bronze Age barrows, Neolithic barrows contain few grave goods, only including the occasional pot or personal ornament. The reason for this lack of grave goods may be due to the barrows being opened during the Neolithic period for the addition of corpses and parts of bodies that had been stored or buried elsewhere. As the number of bones increased, it would then become necessary to make room for the new additions by moving the remains of ancestors deeper into the barrow. It must have been an emotionally charged and uncomfortable experience, squeezing into the dark narrow spaces and moving the bones of those that came before. The barrow was eventually closed sometime around 2000 BC, and the main passage filled with earth, stone and rubble. The forecourt was then blocked with boulders, and a false entrance of twin upright stones was constructed. Finally, 3 massive sarsen stones were erected across the front of the tomb. And although the barrow is now covered with turf, originally it would have had bare chalk sides, making it stand out from its prominent position atop a ridge. Built from about 2850 BC, the time when Windmill Hill and West Kennett Long Barrow are ceasing to be used, Aveburyhenge is one of the largest and undoubtedly the most complex of Britain's surviving Neolithic henge monuments. It is quite likely that before the stone circles at Avebury were erected, timber circles and other structures may have originally filled the area. At some stage in its life, 2 avenues of stones were also built, linking the Aveburyhenge to other nearby ceremonial sites, such as the sanctuary 2.5 kilometres to the south. And although the exact sequence of the construction of the banks, ditches and stone circles at Avebury is not completely understood, excavations alongside aerial and geophysical surveys have indicated that many other features once existed within the enclosure. The impression gained then is of a landscape that was being shaped for rituals that involved inclusion, exclusion and procession. If this is correct, then the various monuments may have been built as public theatres for rites and ceremonies that gave physical expression to the community's ideas of world order, the place of the people within that order, the relationship between the people and their gods, and the nature and transmission of authority, whether that be spiritual or political. The 1,000-year period over which the Aveburyhenge and its associated structures were built is so long that it suggests the community's relationship with its environment may gradually have altered. This changing of ritual practice could then have been the driving force for the building of new monuments, and perhaps ultimately for their eventual abandonment around 1800 BC. Aveburyhenge consists of a huge circular bank and ditch, about 400 metres in diameter, accessed by 4 causewayed entrances at the cardinal points. Inside the henge lies an inner circle of upright stones, enclosing a further 2 stone circles. The shape formed by the ditch is subcircular and is divided by the causewayed entrances into 4 unequal parts. The surrounding chalk bank is now only some 4 to 5 metres high, but once rose to nearly 17 metres above the original 9 metre deep ditch. Where the bank ended at an entrance, timber revetments appear to have been used to keep the bank in place, and the surfaces of the 4 causewayed entrances were reduced so that the banks each side appeared even higher and more impressive. There are 3 great stone circles within the henge at Avebury, an outer circle and 2 smaller inner circles, aligned north to south. The main outer circle probably had about 100 stones arranged around its perimeter edge, and although the stones varied considerably in shape and size, the tallest stones were placed at the northern and southern entrances to their henge, presumably to form a more impressive entrance. The southern circle focused on a central point, the Great Obelisk, which was the largest stone in the circle at over 6 metres high, and was surrounded by 29 smaller stones. These 29 stones were set at regular intervals, about 11 metres apart, the same distance as the stones in the outer circle. Around the central point of the obelisk, an arrangement of smaller stones formed a near rectangular enclosure. The northern circle probably consisted of 27 stones, spaced like that of the southern circle at 11-metre intervals. Most of the northern circle's original stones are now missing, but 4 do remain. At the centre of the circle is what remains of the cove. This once consisted of 3 rectangular-shaped stones arranged around 3 sides of a square that opened to the north. And although not visible today, it is likely that, like the obelisk in the southern circle, the cove was also surrounded by rows of smaller stones. Connecting Aveburyhenge to the sanctuary is the West Kennett Avenue. The avenue was constructed some time after the construction of both the henge and the sanctuary, suggesting a changing relationship between the older monuments. As well as marking the route between the 2 sites, the avenue's stones seems to have acted as grave markers. Excavations along the avenue have revealed several shallow burials at the feet of some of the stones. These burials are generally of individuals, although one contained the remains of 3 people. Elsewhere along the avenue, excavations revealed scatters of human bone. Presumably, these too were from burials at the base of the stones and have been deposited elsewhere due to land usage in the intervening years. The avenue originally ran for 2.5 kilometres and consisted of around 100 pairs of standing stones. These pairs were then placed about every 24 metres along the avenue's route, creating a 15-metre wide corridor between them. The stones lining the avenue appear to have been selected for their shape. Some are long and cylindrical, while others are broad and often triangular. Generally, stones of the 2 different types stood opposite each other. It has been suggested that the stones may have been intended as male and female representations, with the male being long and cylindrical and the female triangular. The route of the avenue appears to take little regard of the natural contours of the area, and on first sight there seems little logic behind the choice of the route. However, the discovery and excavation of a Neolithic site that the avenue skirts suggests that the curves and bends in its course may well have been to respect existing settlements and buildings. Initially built in about 3000 BC, the first structure at the sanctuary was a small and simply constructed round hut, measuring 4.5 metres in diameter. There were 8 posts supporting the outer wall, and a single central post supporting what might have been a conical thatched roof. The second phase of building, perhaps 100 or 200 years later, saw a new building, 11 metres in diameter, that completely enclosed the first hut. Later, a third building was added, that, like the second phase, enclosed the previous 2 buildings. At some stage throughout its construction, possibly while the buildings were still standing, a stone circle was incorporated to the middle ring of posts, thereby making a near continuous internal wall of stones and posts. The fourth and last phase of construction appears to be contemporary with the West Kennett Avenue and possibly with Aveburyhenge. It consisted of a stone circle of 42 stones erected to form an outer boundary to the sanctuary complex. This circle was 40 metres in diameter and was connected to the West Kennett Avenue by 2 stones on its northeast side. The function of the sanctuary remains unclear, although a number of clues suggest that it could have been the centre for some type of mortuary practice. Huge numbers of human bones have been found at the site, together with much evidence of food and ceramics. Indeed, the burial of a child in a crouched position, along with a beaker, appears to have been one of the last acts on the site before its abandonment around 2000 BC. Probably built over a short period between about 2470 and 2350 BC, Avebury Hill is the largest artificial prehistoric mound in Europe. Standing at 30 metres high and 160 metres wide, the monument we see today was not conceived and built in a single effort, but enlarged over several generations. Initially, people stripped the topsoil and stones from the ground, then a small mound of gravel, a little less than 1 metre high, was built. At some later stage, a ring of stakes was set out to define a larger area about 16 metres in diameter, into which soil was deposited. Smaller heaps were then constructed nearby, and some pits, probably relating to ceremonial activity, were dug into the central mound. Soil, turf and boulders were then added, creating a mound 35 metres in diameter and 5 metres high. Next came an enclosing ditch with an internal bank, about 100 metres in diameter, although this ditch does appear to have been backfilled and recut a number of times. Eventually, a water-filled ditch and rectangular extension was dug beyond the ditch, leaving space for the mound to be further enlarged. Although it is unclear as to why Avebury Hill was built, we do know that it was during a time of great change, when new forms of pottery, new burial rites, and the first metalworking arrived in Britain. This period saw intense building activity in the Avebury area, when hundreds, potentially thousands of people came together to construct a variety of monuments, the remains of which can still be seen to this day.